Hello, I'm Maria Felice Cunningham, board member for the Marin Women's Hall of Fame. I am delighted to introduce Sister Marion Irvine, who was welcomed into Marin Women's Hall of Fame as the Honoree for Education in 2009. When we speak of her excellence in the field of education, it includes so much more than classroom activities. Sister Marion also holds the title of Promoter of the Peace, Justice, and the Care of Creation, while speaking out loudly about banning capital punishment, protecting our environment, providing affordable housing, improving education, and other social justice issues that we often just don't know how to solve or where to even begin. This is a woman of strong values and convictions who not only walks her talk, she runs while shouting her words. Sister Marion ran competitively for 15 years and was the oldest woman ever to qualify for Olympic trials in long-distance running in 1983. This event earned her a sponsorship by Nike and a place in the Roadrunners Club of the American Hall of Fame. Sister Marion, you are the running nun with the torch of justice blazing brightly in front of you. In the way of background for our viewers, tell me where you were born, what was the fabric of your life? What influenced your background in your childhood?
Well, I was born in San Francisco, lived in the same home all 17 years of my early life before I left home. I was raised with two brothers, which is a challenge. Two older brothers. They were great teases, but of course I adored them both. And I had a splendid education. And I think when you ask me that question, what I'm reminded about most is the freedom we had as children that I don't see children have today. The freedom to leave on a Saturday in the summer and be gone all day without anybody worrying about who we were with, where we were, anybody bothering us. And I think that freedom has been taken away from young people today, and I feel so badly about that.
And how do you see that changed now in Marin and the places that you've been around?
I'm not sure that I see a change.
Yeah.
I think parents are very protective of their children, and with good reason. But
Our world has changed.
Yes. I miss the fact that you just don't see youngsters out on a scooter by themselves. They're always, with someone older than they are, a parent, whatever.
Sister Marion, I miss the fact that I couldn't do that with my own children. Thank you for bringing that up. And before we delve into your life's triumphs, which are many, and the challenges, which you have certainly stood up to, I want to know more about you being nicknamed the running nun. What got you to lace up your shoes and take off?
Well, it's a rather complicated story, but it happened in 1978. And my niece by marriage was a hospice nurse, and she was into long distance running because she had just had her fourth birth was a set of twins. And she hadn't gotten back into shape, and she needed to do that and to get some time to herself, so she ran. And we were, even though she was a generation younger than I, we were very close friends. And I was very out of shape at the time. I was doing some smoking. I weighed, I had lost 200 pounds, the same 54 times.
Wow.
And I was on one of these roller coasters on weight. And I was completely sedentary and had been for 30 years. So she encouraged me, urged me, cajoled me, harassed me, and finally I gave it a go. And I found that, although of course I was hopeless at it, that I felt quite athletic. It reminded me of my youth. I felt energized, and I just thought I would stick with it and see what happened.
Wow, you just inspired quite a few people to lace up those shoes. Certainly me again, and I used to be quite a runner. Let's go back to, when did you know you wanted to be a nun?
Oh
and
my.
tell us more about what life in a convent is like.
Well, I went to St. Cecilia's Grammar School in San Francisco, taught by the Holy Family Sisters. And I think everybody in the 4th grade, the girls all wanted to be missioners to Africa, all be nuns, and the boys all wanted to be priests. And that made the sister very happy when we told her that. So we were all on the road for religious vocations very young. Then as we got a little bit older, I went on to St. Rose, taught by the Dominican Sisters, the group that I belong to now. And I think that when I was about a sophomore, so I'd say about, I don't know, 15 or 16, I started to think about it. And I loved the sisters that I knew there. They loved teaching, they loved kids. They seemed to have a great sense of humor. They didn't seem to be carbon copies of one another. And I'd always wanted to be a teacher. And I thought, well, service in the church and a teacher, looks like a great life.
Seems like it has been.
Yes, it has. It has.
And tell me about convent life. What is that like?
Well, it's really 2 lives since Vatican II. There was a more conservative, cloistered, semi-cloistered life when I entered in 47. And then in the early 70s, we started to make some pretty radical changes in our habit, for instance, modified. We no longer had to have companions every place we went. We could actually go home and eat with family. All of these were against the rule initially. And when these things became a little bit more liberalized, sisters then also started to change their ministries a bit. Instead of just being purely nurses, hospital work, or purely teachers, sisters started to do other things, pastoral ministry, social services, and it kind of expanded all the way through. So that is phase 1, I guess, prior to Vatican II, and then phase 2.
And you were in the phase 2 where you got to do more.
Right. Yeah, that's correct.
So I hear you have a story about Necco wafers to tell me.
Do you know what a Necco wafer is?
I do. It's Nico. Okay.
I think it is.
They're like little licorice flat wafers.
They're flat wafers. They come in all flavors. Orange, strawberry, root beer, vanilla, licorice. Anyway, when I was little, I wanted to be a teacher, even as a small kid. So I would get all the youngsters on the block to come to my school, which was on the front porch of our home. And we had mental math. Do you know what mental math is?
No,
so
tell me
I
more.
say to you, 20, add 15, subtract 3, divide by 4. What's your answers? We did mental math. And we did church, catechism. And so the Nico wafers were the Eucharist, the holy bread. And if the youngsters behaved and sat there and didn't, they got up communion.
Communion,
Exactly.
yes.
Exactly. Fairly outrageous, but a kid's thing.
I think the answer to what you just said was 7.5. But it took me a little bit longer than I thought to fix it in my head. So you began your life as a teacher. How did this lead to a life of social activism?
Well, I was in education for 50 years. So I, 1949 to 1999, I was a teacher, an administrator, a superintendent, a supervisor. I held all those administrative posts after I really stopped regular classroom teaching, became a principal. And then in 1999, I retired for the first time after 50 years of education. And I took employment with our sisters as the promoter of social justice for 10 years. And I don't know why I didn't do it earlier, because I'd always been interested in social justice, but the education field was one that I was contracted to do. And not that I didn't love it, I did. But
You found your calling.
I found what I really, really loved, which really spoke to my heart. And so I did that for 10 years until 2009. Then I retired for the second time. Now I'm in my third career, which volunteering. What is that word? Volunteerism.
Voluntarily. Is that what you're
No,
looking?
I'm trying to put the ism on it.
Volunteerism.
That's it. That's my word. Anyway, that's what I do now in the area of social justice. In the area of tutoring. I tutor youngsters at the school. And I'm still probably as active as I was when I was employed, but that's the way it goes in third retirement.
Yeah, but active and happy and joyful and making a
I
difference.
I love, Maria. I love what I do. Yeah.
And when you say that social activism really spoke to your heart, there's something there that I think speaks to the heart and minds of many people in Marin County that most of us don't know a lot about it, and that is the death vigils at San Quentin and the different views on the death penalty and what happens. And I'd love to hear that from you, because that is a very big part of Marin, yet we don't hear much except for when something happens there for one day.
Well, the government reinstated the death penalty in 1976. And I came on to my work in 1999. So we were executing people in San Quentin at the time, not in great numbers, but we were executing people at the time. And I brought the sisters, the community, to what we call a corporate stance in abolition of the death penalty. And the reason I came to that conclusion and helpfully educated others to embrace it is that execution is a life issue. And I firmly believe that only God can take care of our end-of-life situations, that the state has no business executing anybody for anything. Now, I know it's intolerable when you think of some really terrible serial killers or something like that, but executing them does nothing. Doesn't do anything for the victims. It doesn't do anything. To confine those people in a special institution with life without parole and whatever you want to call it is, in my mind, very appropriate. But for the majority of people on death row, it's a serious mistake. But because they've committed murder under special circumstances. But most of them, I think, at least the ones I've been associated with on death row, are quite redeemable. And I think life without parole is the way to go. Now, I could go into the cost factor, how much the state would be saved in monies and revenues if we would get rid of the death penalty. It's huge. It's huge. And I think maybe many Californians might be swayed in that area, even if they're not swayed morally, because it's so costly. But you know, you think on death row that there are monsters there. I mean, I worked with several men on death row and have for years. They're my friends. And they're anything but monsters. They're very gentle men. And
maybe a lack of education?
Well,
lack of love?
Let me give you one quick example. My dearest friend, my closest friend, quit school in his junior year of high school. He had lost his dad, and he was ineligible for football as a senior. I suspect because of his grades. I don't recall that. So he just quit. So he started to hang, not in a gang, but, you know, he was into car thefts and, I don't know, robberies. But he had never really hurt anybody. But he was not an altar boy. Don't misunderstand me. He'd been in juvenile detention, etc., before he murdered a fellow. He's been on the row since he was 25.
Young man.
Young man. And he's in his 40s now. And there he languishes. And he could be on the main line. He's not a danger to himself or to anybody else at this point in his life. You know, so they aren't monsters.
No. I think you had started to tell me a very beautiful story about redemption and forgiveness.
Well, I know many of them, of course. Sister Helen Prashon, who wrote A Dead Man Walking, is a mentor of mine in this area. But the story that I would tell you is about a mother whose son had been murdered by a fellow. And she went through the days of the trial and the penalty phase and everything, and he was condemned to death. And she said that she wanted to see him before he was put away. So he agreed, and she went, and she said over all these weeks of this trial and her grief and everything, that she'd gotten to the point where she realized that she was called to forgive this fellow for what he did. Because the burden of hating him or holding on to this revengeful kind of idea was a burden to her soul. It had nothing to do with him at all. So she told him that she had forgiven him, and that she'd hoped he'd have peace, that he'd come to peace, and that she didn't wish him anything bad. And he didn't respond to her at all. Just sat like a statue. Probably as shocked as anything. And when she appeared in a month to visit him, he just couldn't believe she had come back. Why is she here? So, you know, he listened, but didn't respond at all. And then she kept coming every month to see this fellow. And he finally moved from being kind of uninterested in her to angry. And then lastly, to hearing her with a different set of ears. And so one time when he was all by himself in his cell, he got this same lift that she said she'd experienced, where this guilt, this burden that he'd been shouldering, that kept him down, kept him menacing, kept him almost less than human in his interactions, was lifted. And she came, and they became great friends. He was executed. It's not a pretty ending. But she was with him to the very end, the one person who really loved him.
What comes to mind for me is this truly is the meaning of grace.
Yeah.
And I can see
she was an instrument, yeah.
Why this is so important to you now, and it actually should be a lot more important to all of us. Not from a financial end, and from a moral end, and a spiritual end.
And of course, you know, there are racial biases.
Yes.
On death row. There are certainly economic biases on death row. And so the justice system, and now the greatest news is, of course, the execution drug, the sodium pentothal, is being challenged now as being manufactured out of the United States and shipped here. And these companies, Hospira, I think, is a drug company, a pharmaceutical, said, oh no, we're not for having any of our drugs in the execution of people. And so the drug supply is narrowing. So who knows? I mean...
Oh, that's very interesting.
Yeah, who knows where it will end? But I think the important thing about Marin is this is California's death row. I think people think there are penal institutions that have death rows throughout our state in the South, for instance. We do not. Even women who are condemned to death here in California come from the South, from prison in the South, to San Quentin to be executed. Now, we haven't had any of those, but that is what would happen.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Well, this leads into your work with the Marin Interfaith Council. How is this Marin nonprofit impacting our community? And what do you do there?
Well, I was on the board for how many ever years you can be on, maybe like 10, and I was termed out. And then one of our younger sisters took our place of the Dominican sisters who were represented there. She went away to study at St. Louis, so I'm back on the board in the interim. And I think I'm on the Justice Advocacy Team, which is a subcommittee of the board. And I think the most interesting thing for me, for my own personal education, is to know and appreciate the integrity and the quality of people who do not profess the same faith as I do. I have so many Jewish friends, so many Presbyterian friends, Methodist friends, Buddhist friends, that if I hadn't been on the Marin Interfaith Council, I would not have known any of them or anything about them. And I've come to love and appreciate them as some of my best friends.
We are a human tribe in spirit, aren't we?
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
And no one has the right answer.
That's right.
Or we would all be there.
That's right. We all have a little bit of the truth.
Yes, we all do. What is a story of injustice that brings tears to your eye?
Oh, my. Well, I could just bring up something there are a million things, but I'll bring up something very recent. You may have heard that some of the churches in Marin are providing a rotating shelter for the homeless.
Yes, I have.
Men and women, up to 60 men and up to 20 women a night. And the rotating shelter starts on December 1st and ends March 31st. So it's those months. And Sleepy Hollow Presbyterian is right down from where I live. It's not even a half a block from San Domenico's school. And so the other night, I said to another sister, let's go check in on the homeless shelter. Let's go eat with the women. Let's talk with the women. And Maria, it was just an eye-opener, because it's kind of like knowing about death row, the difference between knowing about it and going and having a friend, and knowing about the rotating shelter and going and participating. It's huge. It was huge. You know, the women came in, you'd know most of them were homeless because they didn't have any teeth.
Oh.
You know, they could never afford any dental care. One black lady she had a big coat with a hood on, and she was all wrapped up, and it wasn't that cold inside. And I said to Linda, a woman I was working with, tell me about the woman in the hoodie. And she said, oh, she's newly homeless. She's frightened. She's scared.
Of course she's frightened.
She's scared, you know. And some of the women have mental problems. And I imagine many of them have those problems because they've been abusing drugs and alcohol for many years. Those things do fry your brain over time. But some of them smell. I mean, you're coming to touch with human flesh here. But we stood in a circle and said our grace. We served them soup and salad and fruit and cornbread. And one little lady said to me, you know, I've gained 5 pounds since the shelter opened in December. She said, this is healthy food. They don't have healthy food on the streets.
No.
So leaving there would bring tears to my eyes, because I drive up 5 minutes to a comfy, warm convent with clean sheets and a bed, my own bathroom, and a refrigerator, and anything that I might want.
And many of us in Marin are lucky in that regard, and there's so many that don't have that, and more so we're going to see it.
With foreclosures and all the rest.
Sure. And as a Marin Women's Hall of Fame honoree, you know, it's important for you to impart your wisdom to the young women of today coming up behind you. What would you tell them to guide them on a path of social activism and following their heart?
I would say, if that calls to you in any way, that the first thing you want to do is not enter into a multiple of avenues of social justice, because there are multiple areas, but to focus on the one that calls most closely to your heart. And then I think that you pursue that at whatever level you can, according to your age, and things will, if you pursue, and persevere, things will open up that you didn't see when you first began. And then you'll know whether you're really invited to be a crusader in that area or not. I think so.
Yes, it's true. You become invited.
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
And in speaking of being invited, we know that you picked God's worth as your vocation. But by now you know why God picked you. Why do you think that is?
Why God picked me? I don't know. If I were Mother Teresa, I might have the answer for you. I don't know. I don't know. But I do know that I've been chosen. I do know that the vowed life has been very good to me. It's made me whole. I know I'm called to be a follower of Christ, a disciple. I try to do that kind of work that Jesus would do if he were here on earth today. And I just read something from Gandhi the other day that I just love. And it said, live today as though you were going to die tomorrow. And learn today as though you're going to live forever.
Beautiful.
Isn't that lovely?
That is lovely. And that was please leave us with one thought on how to go out and make a difference in our community.
Love your neighbor. Realize that we're all brothers and sisters in the same family of God. Doesn't matter our color, doesn't matter our social status, our economic status, our race. None of these things matter. We're all part of the one human race with the one God.
With tennis shoes on.
With tennis shoes on. With running shoes. God with running shoes.
I think it's not only love our neighbor, it's also in Marin, know our neighbor.
Yes, yeah, sure.
We have such busy lives.
Yeah, we don't want to be isolated from one another, right?
You know, oh, thank you, Sister Marion.
Welcome. Thank you.
That was just delightful, and
thank you.
And just I learned so much. And what a life well lived.
Thanks very much.
Wow. Thank you for joining us today and for sharing a fascinating story on Sister Marion. Remember, you can always go to the Marin Women's Hall of Fame.org and download a nomination form so that you can bring to our attention any outstanding woman that you know and her achievements and accomplishments in Marin. Thank you.